All right, folks, welcome back. Today it's time to talk about salt bath annealing. Now, what the hell is salt bath annealing? You might be asking yourself. The basics are you get yourself a pot full of molten salt that's at about 900 degrees. You take a piece of brass and you dunk the neck and shoulder down into that molten salt and you leave it there for 5 to 7 seconds. Then you pull it out, dunk it into some water, and you've got yourself an annealed piece of brass. That's the basics of it. Like, annealing has come up several times here in my last few videos. I've never been a big annealing guy. I've just never really been a big annealing guy. Usually with brass, you get 4, 5, 6 firings, and up to that point, annealing is oftentimes, I won't say a waste of time, but it's just not really necessary. It's not something your average Joe reloader should spend his time worrying too much about. But there are some situations where it becomes very important. Recently, in our 22 Nosgar videos, where we're taking 6mm Hager brass, forming it to 22 Nosler, well, the formed brass, the first ones I shot, I found that the neck was very hard and it was giving me too much neck tension. Like, after the forming process, I really needed to anneal that brass to soften it up. That's basically what annealing does. When you work brass over and over, like if you resize it several times, it starts getting hard. So annealing softens it back up. And with soft brass, like when you're resizing your brass, you're putting it up into a full-length sizing die or something. If it's soft brass, you'll get very consistent results of what comes out of that full-length sized die. But if it's really hard brass that's desperately in need of annealing, sometimes you'll get inconsistent amounts of bump on your shoulder, like that measurement from your cartridge base up to the shoulder. Different pieces of brass will spring back a little bit more than others, and you'll start getting inconsistent readings. You'll also get inconsistent neck tension, where soft brass that resizes very uniformly and the neck is nice and soft, you get uniform neck tension on your bullet. That's what annealing's all about. Now, up to this point, whenever I've felt the need to anneal, I've always just pulled out a good old propane torch and done it that way. You fire up the torch, you get some way to put your brass in a drill, whether it's a shell holder of some sort, or a lot of people will use like spark plug sockets. You know how they have the rubber part that grabs a hold of a spark plug? Well, they're pretty good at holding a piece of brass as well. And you just spin it through the flame here on your propane torch for a few seconds and you're done. You're annealed. And that's honestly worked pretty well for me. We've done it a couple times here, in some of my recent videos, and I get pretty good results. So this is definitely your cheapest way. If you're wanting to experiment a little bit with annealing, just pull out the torch from the garage and give it a shot. But the problem with the torch is it's a little bit slow, especially the way I've done it. So I've got a big old batch of 223 brass. This is Lake City 556. And we've been shooting it here on my channel, this same batch, for probably over a year. It's got 4 or 5 firings on it. It's been really, really good brass for us. It's still in really good shape, but it's getting to the point where it really needs annealed. And the thought of going through this is 400 or 500 pieces, I think. The thought of going through all of these with a torch is a little bit overwhelming. This is hours of work if we did it with a torch. Now, some of you guys who have your torch method down, to a science and can really do it fast, maybe you can share your techniques with us down in here in the comments. But I decided to give this salt bath annealing a shot. It seemed like it was going to be very fast, and I think it's going to be pretty consistent. That's part of the problem when you look into annealing. Man, a lot of the solutions are just extremely expensive. The top shelf best there is the Annealing Made Perfect machine, the AMP annealer. But for a full-blown setup, you're looking at over $1,500 at this point. You've got to be extremely serious about your shooting to drop $1,500 on an annealing machine. It would take an extremely long time to recoup your cost if you're just talking about, trying to extend the life of your brass and things like that. It's an expensive machine. I understand how there are a lot of people it totally makes sense and it's worth every penny, but that's just not me. And then working down, there's a bench source annealer that's a little over $500, which is a really nice setup. It uses torches. It's basically just an automated torch method that makes it so that your brass is in the flame a consistent amount of time and speeds up the process a little bit. That bench source is a great looking unit. And then a little bit cheaper than that, at $275, is the Annealing's machine. It's a similar sort of thing where it's basically just a torch annealer. that kind of automates the process and makes it so that each piece of brass is in the flame the exact amount of time. But still, at $275, that's a little bit of an investment. It's getting a whole lot closer to reasonable, right? $275 is getting pretty reasonable. If you're a enthusiast shooter, you know, it won't take you more than a couple years to probably recoup $275 worth of cost just in extended brass life and better performance. Like, we're getting down into the reasonable for a hobbyist sort of price range. So I seriously considered the Annealing machine. But this salt bath method really looked like the cheapest option for me. Now, you can do this completely on your own, like completely do-it-yourself sort of a setup. But I decided to go ahead and order the salt from this company called Ballistic Recreations. Here's a can of the salt. You can see Annealing salt for brass cartridge cases. And down here you'll notice it is potassium nitrate and sodium nitrate blend with a melting point of 142 degrees Celsius. Now, 142 degrees Celsius is about 288 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that is much lower than the melting point of table salt. Like standard sodium chloride table salt, it doesn't melt until 800 degrees Celsius or 1475 degrees Fahrenheit. So table salt really is not an appropriate salt to use for this method. And this potassium nitrate and sodium nitrate, it's hard to get. Like, there's safety stuff and like hazmat concerns and all of that sort of junk. So it's a little bit hard to buy. You can buy it. Like I said, you can do this completely on your own, but I decided to go ahead and just order from this Ballistic Recreations website because they only charge $9 per can of this salt that's ready to go, pre-mixed and ready to rock. So I decided to go this way. The whole setup is built around one of these. This is a little Lee precision melter. This is used for, you know, bullet casting. If you want to melt lead, it's a lead furnace basically that's used for ladle pouring. So these are pretty darn cheap. Like, you can get one on Mid-South Shooter Supply or Natchez Shooters Supply for around $36. I've got another one of these, but it's been used quite a bit for lead, and I just decided to go ahead and pick up another one since it's only 36 bucks, and I thought it would be worth the cost because I'm looking to use this setup a lot. You'll notice I've already got some salt melted into this guy. That's what the salt looks like once it's melted down and then cooled off and solidified. And this wire that's sticking out of it is a thermocouple, which we'll get to here in just a little bit, but this is how you read the temperature of your molten salt. But the Lee Precision Melter is kind of what this Ballistic Recreations kit is built around. And the really cool thing is this case holder that they sell. This fits perfectly down into the Lee Precision Melter. And you'll notice there's these two big holes. That's where your brass drops into. And then there's these little holder thingies. Yeah, let me grab a piece of brass. Yeah, here's a piece of that 223 brass. Yeah, it just drops right down in there. So you can basically do two pieces at a time, and you get a good cadence down so that you've got each piece of brass down into the molten salt the right amount of time. And that's how it basically works. There's also another larger hole here, which is where you put your thermocouple down into. Yep, like I've already got it in my salt. But this is pretty well made. Like, I think this guy makes them by hand, and this piece is $28. So it makes for a pretty reasonable setup. Now, they sell kits. Ballistic Recreations sells a nice little kit that comes with the case holder, which this is the standard one. They also make a large case holder, which I think is for like 50 BMG and 338 Lapua. Some of the really big boy cartridges, this isn't quite deep enough for. So there's a large, but I just wanted the standard one. So you get a standard case holder, you get a can of salt, which one of these is more than enough to fill up the pot once. I went ahead and picked up two cans just for the hell of it, but one can is enough to get started. It also comes with a thermocouple that fits perfectly down in this hole, and it comes with a little meter, a temperature meter that reads the temperature on the thermocouple. So I decided not to get the kit because I really didn't need that meter. What I've got is a PID controller. This uses the same, connections that the temperature meter that he's selling uses. It reads your, reads temperature is basically what this thing's all about. But a PID controller also controls the power. You feed power into the controller and then it feeds power out to the pot. And it uses that temperature reading as a feedback. You set a temperature setting and this guy will automatically keep the pot at the temperature setting you want. Hopefully that makes sense. You'll see it in action here in just a few minutes. So I didn't need anything. I didn't need a thermocouple because I've got a bunch of them already laying around. And I didn't need the temperature meter because I have a PID controller. Now, if you go with his kit and just have, kind of a standard temperature meter, you need to, manually adjust your temperature to get the right reading on your temperature meter. Where in my case, we're just going to turn this guy all the way up to high and we're going to let the PID controller control the temperature. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the whole kit with the meter, the thermocouple, the case holder, and a can of salt is $100. If you throw in, $35 for a melter, then you're at $135. Now, the problem is shipping. This Ballistic Recreations guy is up in, I think he's in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So shipping's a little bit extreme. I got 2 cans of this and a shell holder and it was $22 to ship. So basically $46 plus $22 of shipping. It is what it is. That's international shipping. Plus you're talking about Alberta. So there's frickin' dog sled teams and ice road truckers involved. Shipping's just expensive. So I would say if you're starting from nothing and you bought his $100 kit plus a $35 melter, then you throw in another $20, $25 for shipping, you're looking at about $150 to get started with this salt bath annealing. So that's a little bit more than half the price of the Annealing's machine. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see if it, proves to be a good method. I don't see why it wouldn't be. We just need to get used to the method, but it represents a pretty good savings. And if you can't quite get your method down properly with a plain old, propane torch, maybe this is another option for you. Now, since I didn't need a thermocouple and I didn't need the temperature meter that he sells or any of that stuff, yeah, I spent $68 at Ballistic Recreations and then bought another, $35 for the Lee Precision melter. So I'm into this at about $100. And I'm hoping this is going to be a good setup because I would like to start annealing more and more here on my channel. This seems like a good value. Now, you might be wondering, why not just lead bath anneal? Why would you want to use a salt bath rather than just lead? I've already got several lead furnaces that can melt lead and put it at just the right temperature to do annealing. Some people do that. The advantage of salt is that it's water soluble. So once we finish our annealing process, we dump it into some water to cool off the brass. Well, it's also going to dissolve any salt that happened to get pulled out with the case. With lead, if you happen to get lead that basically solders itself to your case, you're kind of screwed. I don't know how much of a problem that would be. It might not be a problem at all. So if you've got experience with lead bath annealing, let us know down in the comments. How does it go for you? Is lead sticking to the brass a problem at all? Or is there any downside? I don't know. I decided to go with the salt. Now, as I showed you before, I've already got some salt melted into this guy. So there were a couple processes that I already went through here before I turned on the camera. I have not annealed a single piece of brass yet, so we're going to cover that in depth, but I wanted to go ahead and get the salt melted into here. The first step was just putting some salt in there and doing that initial melt. So I just dumped it in and let it warm up and melt down. And that initial melting, I'm not sure how much of it was from the new pot and how much of it was from the salt, but it was definitely putting off some fumes and some smoke and stuff. That's crap you probably don't want to breathe. It'll make your lungs rust, I think, or it'll make your kids have 3 legs or something like that. There's a warning here in the manual. He does send a pretty nice little manual, guide to salt bath annealing, that covers quite a bit of stuff, but there's a warning, do not heat the salt above 1090 degrees Fahrenheit or 590 degrees Celsius. Temperatures above this level will cause the salt to break down, releasing fumes that may affect your health. Overheated salt also becomes an increasingly powerful oxidant in contact with flammable materials such as wood, oils, waxes, or reactive metals, such as aluminum or magnesium, risk of vigorous fire or explosion. So if it's not already obvious, molten freaking salt is dangerous and we need to be careful about our temperatures. It's another reason why I'm glad to have the PID controller, because if you're controlling the temperatures manually on this guy, you need to watch yourself. This crap could get dangerous. So that initial meltdown, like I said, it smoked a lot. I think some of it was probably the new pot, but I don't know. Some of it might have been the salt. So I made sure to open a window and keep the area well ventilated and all of that crap. And as it melted down, I kind of gave it some stirs. It gets a little bit foamy at first, and then over time, the foam goes away and you end up with a yellowish kind of clear liquid. So that was the first step, to get it melted down for the first time, and then I let it all cool down and solidify. Watching the PID controller as it cooled down, it seemed to freeze right about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty close to the 142 degrees Celsius, which is 288 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty close to the 288 degrees Fahrenheit that he says it should freeze at. So yeah, that all made sense. So after I had heated it all up to melt it and then let it cool down to freeze. So then after that, the one last thing I needed to do was to auto-tune my PID controller. With these PID controllers, what it's melting changes the settings in it drastically. So whenever you change, it was tuned for a 20 pound pot full of lead, and now we're switching to a smaller pot full of salt. It's definitely smart to go ahead and run it through an auto tune. So I just have to press and hold the blue button, the auto tune button on it, and then let it go through a cycle of warming it up to the target temperature. I've set it for 800 degrees and then just kind of let it figure its stuff out and let the auto tune process complete. So that's where I stand right now. Like, I did that. My PID's ready to go. We've got some salt that's already kind of melted into the pot and ready to go. So we're really ready to start playing around with some brass. So let me get this guy hooked up. We'll get it warming up again and we'll start with that process. All right, so we got her fired up here and temperature is rising quickly. And like I mentioned, they send some pretty good instructions. And in this section here, it talks about the temperature you should use for annealing. And the proper temperature for annealing is the subject of some debate. So just like always, people are going to argue about this. But he says he's heard from others suggest that temperatures in the range of 450 to 550 degrees C will cover most, if not all, purposes. Feedback I have had from other users indicates that 500 C is a common target temperature. 550 C provides a very good quality anneal, but I have seen some evidence that extended use at that temperature may shorten the life of the Lee Precision Melter, so I now avoid the top end of the range. That seems reasonable. So let's stay away from 550. Let's stick with 500 C. Well, 500 degrees C is 932 degrees Fahrenheit. So let me set this guy to 930 degrees. Yeah, there we go. We'll start with 930 degrees and see how this works out for us. Now, later on, he mentions that you will probably find that the soak times need to fall in the range of 4 to 7 seconds. Any less and the case neck will not be adequately heated. Any more and the annealing heat will migrate too far down the case body. Like, that's extremely important, right? That's the very most important thing. We want to anneal the neck, we want to anneal the shoulder, maybe just the tiniest little bit down onto the body, but we absolutely, under no circumstances, want to anneal the case head. This part of the brass needs to stay as hard and strong as possible, and softening it in any way is bad news. And I think that's a big part of our temperature, right? 930 degrees. We don't need 930 degrees to anneal brass, but we need 930 degrees or something in that range so that we can get the neck and shoulder hot enough, quick enough, so that this part gets annealed, but it's not enough time for the heat to migrate up to our case head that we have to protect from getting too hot. So if you've got some jackwagon telling you to put all your brass in the oven or something and heat it up for a couple hours, they are morons. You can't heat the whole brass case. You do not want to soften that head portion. You'll get yourself in trouble and you'll blow your face off. All right, so we're at 269 degrees and it's already starting to melt. Yeah, there's our chunk of salt that the thermocouple's frozen into. So we'll be up to full temperature in no time. Okay, so we just passed 800 degrees. We're almost there, but I wanted to show you what we're going to use to set our pace. Most people seem to use a metronome app on their phone or on their tablet. And I got one here on this here tablet. Hey, how's it going? So this is a basic metronome app. I've got it set to 60 beats per minute, which should be 1 click per second. There you go. Can you hear that? We get 1 click per second. Yeah, I'll put it a little closer to my microphone. So that's what we're going to use to pace ourselves. And like I think I showed you, the instructions say that between 4 to 7 seconds is probably the range we're going to be looking at. And that'll of course depend on the type of brass we're annealing and the thickness and all of that stuff. So we're going to start out here with 223 brass. Reasonably light stuff. Maybe we'll be on the lower end, 4 or 5 seconds, maybe 5 or 6. And if we're doing 300 Winchester Magnum brass that maybe, has a little bit more mass, maybe we'll need to be up in the 6 or 7 range. I'm not going to be able to answer that question in today's video. I'm brand new to this, so it's a lot of trial and error here. So we're getting close to our target temperature, and you'll notice that my PID controller, that left-hand red button that's flashing now, it's starting to modulate the power output to the pot, and it should stabilize reasonably close to 930 degrees. I almost said feet per second. So this is the advantage of the PID controller. We don't have to worry about doing this manually. If you buy the kit from Ballistic Recreations, this is the point where you'll need to be watching the temperature meter and trying to get the adjustment on your pot set just right. Now, one good thing in his little manual, he's got a nice little chart, a heating curve for Lee Precision Melter, purchased in 2015, if my camera will focus. There it is. So he shows the settings number 6, 7, 8, and 9, and what their temperature curves look like. We are shooting for 500 degrees Celsius, right about there, which is 932 degrees, actually right there. But we've got it set to 930, so we would be at about the 500 setting, which looks like it would be around setting 8 or 9 on the melter. So you're going to have to play with your melter and the temperature reading to see, what setting works best for you. And once we start introducing cold brass into the molten salt, it's going to be cooling down and all of that. So if you're getting into this, it's probably going to be a little bit of a battle at the beginning to find the right temperature setting and what works for your workflow. Okay, so we're up to temperature, but the problem now is I haven't introduced the case holder into the melter yet, right? So that's what we need to do next. So what I really need to do is pull out this thermocouple that I just had sitting down in the salt. Yep, so let's move that guy down there. And let's see if we can drop this guy down in here without killing ourselves. Like, this is extremely dangerous stuff, right? Molten salt is no freaking joke. And if you happen to get water, all right, so I think I got our thermocouple down through the hole, and I've got our case holder down into the melter. It's a really nice fit. It really is. Let me get you a better view of that guy. And of course, introducing that cold metal into the pot has dropped our temperature a little bit. So the PID is doing its thing, bringing us back up to 930 degrees. Yeah, look at this dude. Isn't that a nice fit? Like, it fits the Lee Precision Melter really, really nicely. I think this case holder is absolutely worth the 28 bucks he's charging for it. It's a really nice piece of gear. It fits just perfect. Now, what I'm trying to get you a view of is the salt level. I'm afraid I may have it a little bit too high. So with our piece of brass, we want to hit all of the neck, all of the shoulder, and just down into the body of the case just a little bit. Let me get something I can point with a little bit. There's an Allen wrench. Like maybe we want the salt level about right there. That is hot. Getting my fingers a little bit too close. Yeah, maybe just about right there. And I'm afraid that the level of the salt might be a little bit high right now. If we pull out these first couple pieces and we're finding that, it's way down here somewhere, I might need to grab a spoonful of salt and pull it out of this dude or something. So let's turn on the metronome. So let's try and do 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I put it into a bowl of water. Now, the color of the brass is not really a good indicator, but man, this didn't change whatsoever. That's interesting. So let's move on to the next piece. This piece, let's go ahead and do it 7 seconds, just to see what the color change looks like. Seven. And down into the water. Yeah, I think the problem with this 223 brass is I've got it tumbled so clean that it's just not really discoloring the way you might expect from annealing. But can you see that line right about right there? That seems to be about where the salt level's at, which is good. I'll tell you what, let me see if I can find some dirty brass around here, or some dirtier brass that might show us the color change we're expecting. All right, so here's a piece of 300 Winchester Magnum brass that hasn't been tumbled after it was fired. Let's see what this guy looks like. Let's give it 7 seconds. So let's get in sync with the metronome. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Dump it in the water. Let's see what this guy looks like. And let's shut off the metronome so it doesn't drive us crazy. Okay, so I'm not sure how well the camera is going to pick it up, but this looks like a little bit more like what we would expect as far as color change goes. It looks annealed, right? And it looks to be just about the right level as well. So let's do one more of these. Click on the metronome. In. Seven seconds. And cool it off. And let's just do a couple of them here. Seven seconds. Down again. Seven seconds. All right, let's see what those three look like. All right, so here are those three. Those look just about right as far as the amount that we went down below the shoulder, you know, just a little bit below the shoulder. The color change stops. I think the level of the salt, probably just a little bit above the shoulder or below the shoulder if you want to look at it that way. And we didn't seem to get any extreme heat migration up the case. And as you can see, I'm not wearing any gloves, and I was able to pull them out, you know, by hand. So I think we might just be just about right. Let's go back to some 223 cases and let's do these for 7 seconds. Seven seconds. Down in there. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Water. Ah, that one did. That one kind of got jammed up a little bit. Let's try this again. Okay, that was a little bit better. 7. All right, so here are those pieces. And it doesn't seem to be picking up at all here in the in the viewfinder of the camera, but I think our salt level is coming down to right about right there. And there is definitely a kind of a gradual color change right in this area, but the camera's not really picking it up very well. So let's go ahead and ruin a couple. Let's do one for 10 seconds and then the next one for 15 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 10. Okay, here's the next one. We'll do it for 15 seconds. There it is. Yeah, that one that one burned the fingers a little bit coming out. Yeah, and if anything, this should illustrate how color change doesn't mean anything. These are those two pieces. I think at least the 15-second one is probably ruined. The case head just got a little bit too hot, but not a lot of distinct color change. And like I mentioned, it all comes down to the fact that I had tumbled these a little bit too well, and they're just not showing much. So I went looking for some other random stuff. This is 7.5 by 55 Swiss brass. Yep, Norma brass. So let's see what 5 seconds does to these guys. So this seems to be just about right. It made it down past the shoulder a little bit. So definitely got all of the neck and the shoulder. The heat didn't migrate too far, it doesn't look like. A little bit of discoloration down just a touch, but overall it just looks like a nicely annealed piece of brass. So it just looks like the 223 brass is not going to discolor, and there's not a darn thing wrong with that. Now let's see if I can get a technique down to where we can do them 2 at a time. So let's do 6 seconds each. So every 3 seconds I need to be putting one in, taking one out. Yeah, this is hard to get the rhythm down on. I think I've had a couple that I left in there a second or two too long. So that's going to take some practice. So the question is, the ones we've done so far, how do we know we've actually annealed them and that we're not just wasting our time? I'll tell you what, let's pull out a full-length sizing die and see if we can measure any difference between these annealed cases and cases that haven't been annealed yet. All right, so I've got this Redding small base full-length sizing die set up to where before they go into the die, They're measuring about 1.465 from the cartridge base to the shoulder. This is the Hornady headspace comparator kit with the A330 bushing in there. So we start out at 1.464 and this should come out at 1.460. So about 4 thousandths of bump to that shoulder. Let's see what the number comes up to. Perfectly, 1.460. I've got several more here. Let's go ahead and run through the rest of them. Make sure they all come out very consistently at 1.460. 1.460. The next one, 1.4595. Yep, so that one's just a half a thousandth shorter. The next one is 1.460, and the next one's 1.460. So hopefully you get the point. This brass is coming out of our fulling sizing die with an extremely consistent measurement from the base to the shoulder. So let's grab a couple pieces that we haven't annealed and see how they come out. All right, here's the first. See if it reads any different. Just a touch, 1.461. So an additional thousandth of an inch of spring back. That's not too much. Here's the next one. Yeah, that one's actually 1.460, just like the others. And here's the last one I grabbed. And this one's 1.462. So a little bit of difference, right? The two longest ones that we measured were two that weren't annealed. We had a 1.461 and then this one's 1.462. So at least a little bit of difference here in our resizing measurement. All right, so here's the next thing I need to do. I need to take this big, huge box of brass. I think I'm gonna dunk them for 6 seconds. I need to figure out a flow. I need to figure out the choreography of taking advantage of both holes in this case holder and getting the process down as fast as I can. So I'm gonna turn off the camera and I'll bring you guys back once I get my process down and feel like I'm doing them at a decent pace. So I'll see you guys here in just a second. Okay, so I'm coming down to the end of this batch and a couple things I've learned. There's no way I can alternate. There's no way. Like I just don't have the coordination. So I have to drop them 2 at a time and then pull them out at the same time. So what I did was set my metronome to 6 beats instead of 4. So every 6th beat, I'm either pulling them out or I'm putting them in. Another thing I've learned is gloves are absolutely necessary. I don't have any. They're down in my garage and I'm too lazy to go get them. But you do get a little bit of splash with the salt whenever you're dunking it in the water. Now, I've got this water pretty close to my pot full of molten salt. This is extremely dangerous. If water gets down into one of these holes, we're in big trouble. So trying to be careful not to splash water into the holes and doing this 6-second cycle. So let me listen to the metronome here for a second and try and get in the flow, and I'll show you guys how I've been doing them. 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Into the water. 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 6. Like I can't even talk. This kind of takes some focus. 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 6. 4, 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. Now occasionally, like that one kind of went and a little bit difficult. And I had to give it an extra second because sometimes they don't go down on that guide perfectly and get a little bit jammed up. So now I got to listen to my metronome, get back into my beat here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. 5, 6. Pulled those out just a half second too early. Three, 4, 5, 6. 6. Last one. 5, 6. All done. That's it. All right, we can stop the annoying metronome. All right, folks, so my big batch of 223 brass is now annealed. That went pretty quick. Like, it took a while to get a rhythm and figure out a technique that worked for me. But the metronome being on 1 second beats, and I don't know, I'm not a music guy. There's like a hard beat with a different tone and then 5 additional beats and then another hard beat. That seemed to be about the right rhythm. So 2 rounds went in every 12 seconds. So that's 1 round per 6 seconds, which means about 600 rounds per hour. More realistically, probably 500 rounds per hour. That seems like a pretty good pace. Like 500 rounds per hour annealed. It seems fast. There's no way I could do that many with a torch. No way. So I think this is going to be fast. I think it's going to be pretty easy. I think the metronome keeps it at least pretty close to, consistent. Maybe I'll need to lengthen or shorten that time. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. So lessons learned, I need some gloves. You might see this, like there's salt all over the place. Pulling the rounds in and out, dumping them in the water, I had frickin' salt going all over the place. I think the price on this setup is reasonable. I got started cheap because I already had a PID controller and a thermocouple and all of that stuff. But even if you don't have that, getting started for 150 bucks is cheaper than any other method you're going to find. The first jar of salt that I've cracked open, let me darken up that camera a little bit so you can see. That's about how much that's left. I probably used 65, 70% of this first can to fill up the pot the first time. You're going to lose some salt every time you use it, right? Some of it is going to get stuck to the cartridge and end up in the water bath, and you're going to need to top it off every once in a while. I'm glad I went ahead and got 2 cans of it. This should last me a really long time, I think. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Now, the real life results I tried to show you on the folding sizing die, not very dramatic, right? We saw slightly more consistent resize headspace numbers. That's what you're looking for with annealing. I don't think it's a magical answer to anything, but if you're looking for that last little bit of consistency, if you're looking for a little bit more brass life, if you're forming brass and annealing is absolutely necessary, this seems like a pretty good setup. So far so good. I'm happy with my purchase. Now, one thing I'll say about Ballistic Recreations, it took a while to get this because it was all out of stock, or at least the case holder was out of stock. So I think this is a guy welding these together in his garage or whatever, just kind of doing this as a side project. One thing that was a little frustrating is on his website, there wasn't any like notify me when it's back in stock option or anything like that. So I just had to keep going back over and over to the website waiting for things to come in stock. So that's a little frustrating. The website, I should probably give it to you since I can't link it in the description because YouTube sucks. Yeah, so it's ballisticrecreations.ca. And right now, this standard shell holder or this standard case holder is out of stock. So it's one of those deals. It's hard to get a hold of. But if you have a little bit of patience like I did, it took me a couple weeks to get the order placed, but pretty happy. That case holder seems to be really well made. It fits that Lee Precision Melter pot very nicely. Just a great design. So I think that's it, folks. If you see annealing on my channel here in the future, this is probably going to be how we're doing it. So I'll see you guys next time.